Good morning, everyone. We're doing Parshat Shemot, the beginning of Sefer Shemot. We're going to continue with our Divrei Torah of the Bat Ayin, and we're going to do the first Torah in Parshat Shemot. It starts with Ve'ela Shemot, and the question that the Bat Ayin has, which is a very simple question, is that it says Ve'ela Shemot Bnei Israel, and why do we have to say Ve'ela? The word Vav usually implies that we're adding to something, and we say, and this happened. Even if we quote according to the Ibn Ezra, the Ramban, and many other Mefarshim who say that Ve'ela means that it's continuing what happened at Bereshit, we still have a question as to why the first word would be Ve'ela, right? Meaning there's still a question, even though we may understand that it's just a continuation from the previous Torah, previous Sefer. So we have to understand it. So he says, the word ve'ela seems to be, if it says, Hine lichora vav and Osef b'mila ve'ela hu miyutar. It seems to be extra. He asked the question basically saying is that either the word ela means the vav ela, either the vav is extra, or we should say that should just say ela, the word ela. It's a famous question that many Mefarshim ask. As I mentioned, the Ibn Ezra, the Ramban, and many others ask the question. But most likely, what the Bat Ayin is asking here is just saying is why this. So Vayadua Ma'amara Amsal, he quotes the Zohar here, the Zohar Chadash. He's quoting. He says Ve'ela Gematria Membet. The word, if we look at the word Ve'ela, Vav is 6, Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, and Hey is 5. Together you get 42, which represents the Ramos Sheshem Membet Yerad Mitzrayim Im Yaakov. He's quoting the Zohar. It's a famous Zohar that mentions that Eila Shemot B'nei Yisrael B'Mitzrayim et Yaakov, as well as the Shla Kadosh on the Zohar. He says in Parshat Shemot, and this week's Parsha, he mentions that he says that the Rosh Shemot, he says the word Shemot is not Ve'ela Shemot, meaning these are the names, but these are the names of the people, but rather Eila Shemot. This is the Shla Kadosh says that Kidarash Shemot. And he says that in Shemot, it's not just the names of the people that went down, but rather these are the names that he's talking about, the names of Hashem. Ve'ela means that the 42 letters is the names these are the 42 names of Hashem that came down with Yaakov. That's what he says. V'nei be'emet gedolei Yisrael sheyodim razin doraita bevadai zeu Torah gedola lahem berazin doraita. Aval hu Torah mored derech l'chol ish kirko ech yavor Hashem, ech yavod Hashem. לכן צריכים אנחנו לידע להבין הדרך שמורה אותנו התורה הקדושה בזה ששם מבית ירד עם יעקב למצרים. So he says, of course, the people who really understand what it means that 42 names of Hashem came down to Mitzrayim with Yaakov, well, those people who understand what that means, we would understand it. But he says, obviously, that's not something that a regular person who's trying to understand what the Musar, what the lesson is, right? So he says that it doesn't make sense, right? We have to understand this kind of thing. Right? What kind of lesson can a person who's maybe not as familiar with all the names of Hashem, what can we get out of that? Right? So he says we know that the Torah is meant for a person to on a day-to-day, as it says, right? The Torah, we know the word Torah is Lashon Hora'ah, it's a language of teaching. And what lesson can we learn? Right? So even in the greatest, deepest mystical meanings of the words, we still should be able to find some sort of avoda that a person who may not understand everything should be able to find. So that he said, so the Bat Ayin, obviously, who was a great learned person, understood. He said, we have to understand it. So if he doesn't understand everything, what kind of limud should we be able to take out from what the Bat Ayin is saying? So he says, Lavin kol zeh, gam lavin inyan chiyuv. He says, Lavin kol zeh, gam lavin inyan chiyuv, mitzvot shel zchirat yitziat Mitzrayim b'chol yom. So he says that we know that there is a mitzvah, right? We know that when we look in we have a mitzvah to remind ourselves of reminding ourselves of remembering the Yetziat Mitzrayim every day, right? As we know, it says in the Sefer Charedim, it says in Perik Tet, it says it's a mitzvah to say, right? Because we have to remember that we were once Avadim and Paro, and just like we were Paro and we were slave there, and had he not taken us out there, just like we say in the Haggadah, Ilu lo hitzanu adainu banenu ayinu vedim, right? Zachor yom hazeh asher yitzam Mitzrayim, right? And it's not just reminding us in our heart, Rather, we have to say is we actually really have to strengthen ourselves, really understand that that we actually say it physically. It's not just from our heart we have to remind ourselves, but rather with our mouth we actually say it. That's according to the Smag, as well as many other people say that we should actually physically say it, that we are reminding ourselves every day. So the Bat Ayin is saying is that we have to understand, in order to understand what this means, that Yaakov Avinu brought down, and all these 42 letters, that the 42 names of Hashem came down with Yaakov. In order to understand that, we also have to understand what it means that we have a chiyuv of to remind ourselves every day of Mitzrayim. הנה עיקר עבודת האדם הוא מלחמה להילחם בכל יום עם היצר הרע שנקרא פרעה, עורף, ומשיאו לתאוות גשמיות הבלי העולם הזה, וזהו עניין גלות מצרים, ומלחמה גדולה היא זו. So he says that in order, the main avodah that we have is to fight with every day with our Yetzer Hara, and he calls the Yetzer Hara Paro, Oref, and it's in the Shar Psukim, which is that we look at the Klipot, and we know that there's with going too much into it, we know that the Paro was known that as the Yetzer Hara, the other side, and we also look at the word Paro is the opposite of Ha'oref, is the opposite word of the opposite letters of Ha'oref, right? And basically, is our neck is basically pulls us down every day to things, to do mundane things. And if we look at the Balatanya, he says, the Torah Or, he says, Paro hu oref b'achorayim, v'adam zehu inyan haratzonot zarot semeshech hartavot haguf, u'lumal zehu inyan yanikat hachitzonim. So he says, Paro is the opposite, it's the back of our neck, just like the back of our neck over here. Paro is that back of our neck who pulls us, and drags us back to the things that are mundane, our physical pleasures and things like that. And this, he says, this is the Galut Mitzrayim. This was the Galut that we were continuing to pull, but we were continuously moving back and forth, back and being stuck in those tavot. And then he says, Milchama Gdola Hizo. This is a great battle. It's not something that just happens. It's a great battle that we constantly fight with and constantly struggle with. So he says, now how are we going to fight this war? How are we going to fight this war? And we're going to get soon connected back to the Shemot in a second. But he says, what do we need first? We serve Rishit, Hu B'chinat Torah. We need to be Torah. Right? He says, we have to continuously schedule time for learning. And not only that, be involved in Torah at all times, whether you're at work or whether you're doing other things, have in mind that you're doing things that are according to the Torah, according to Hashem. Right, this is as we know in the Kedushin. In Kedushin, it's the Gemara in Kedushin says, right, it's Parati Yetzer Harah, Parati Lo Tavlin. I have a Yetzer Harah. And what's the elixir for the Yetzer Harah? It's Torah. So he says that's the first thing. The second thing is humility. שידע בעצמו גודל שפלותו, ואיך שהוא משקע בתאוות גשמיות ובלי עולם, זה שאינו עיקר כלל, ויוכנע לבבו, ויהיה ליבו נשבר בקרבו, וזה ישפיל היצר הרע ויתיש כוחו. So he says, step one is to be learning Torah and constantly be involved in Torah and constantly have your mind in Torah. And the second thing is to be humble, to know that you are, constantly recognize how low you are, how not insignificant, but when we look around and see what we are in relation to the rest of the world, the greater world, we realize that our humility is important. And the third thing is שיבקש רחמים מבעל הרחמים שירחם עליו, ייתן לו כוח לעמוד נגד היצר הרע, מבחינת פרעה, והשם ישפילו ויתגבר עליו ויצא מהגלות. ואז ירחם עליו השם, יהיה בעזרו ויוציאו מהגלות מצרים. ובחינות אלו צריך לעסוק בכל יום, ביום שלו להסיח דעתו כלל מזה. So what he's saying is the third thing is we have to ask for Hashem's mercy, for Hashem's rachamim, every single day, to give us the chance, the opportunity, and the strength to be able to battle the Yetzer Hara. And by doing that, he says, we have to, in order to ask for Hashem's mercy to get us out of this battle with the Yetzer Hara, to recognize. And how do we ask for battle? How do we have to ask for mercy? By recognizing that we're insignificant, and saying, Hashem, we realize that our biggest battle to fight every day is with the Yetzer Hara. And by doing that, we realize that we're asking for forgiveness. We're being humility, or are being humble. By doing that, with that humility and that approach, and with the Torah that we learn, we're constantly viewing ourselves as needing to be working on ourselves and strengthening ourselves against the Yetzer Hara in battle. Now we're going to bring it back to what we were talking about before, about the beginning, which is Ela Shemot. And as he says, these three things, Rachamim, Torah, and Anava, they are, as we know, Torah. Yaakov reminds us of Torah. How do we know? we go back to Parsha, when we talk about Yaakov, he was Ishtam Yoshev Alim, and many of the Mefarshim say there that he was learning Torah. Torah should be chtav, and he said, so that's the there are many in the Zohar also mentions that Torah, Shoshad Barim Halam Hamed Al Torah, and the Zohar mentions there that is Yaakov. The Torah is Yaakov Avinu. So we have a connection between Yaakov and Torah. And Uvashem Membet and Ramez B'chnat Siyat Shmaya, and the name of the 42-letter name, right? That we know that is one of the names of Hashem represents Siyata Dishmaya, because obviously that's an obvious one, Hashem and Siyata Dishmaya. Uvachinat Anava, right? Uvachinat Anava, which is humility. So we have, if we actually do the math, Yaakov, we have Yaakov, Membet, and Anava equals actually the gematria of Paro. I just did the math myself. It actually comes out to be 355, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just look if I have the piece of paper, just so people can say that it. Can't seem to find it, but so if we actually look at it, Paro is 355. And if we do Anava, Yaakov, and the 42, and 42, you get to 355, which is the same. So what they're basically saying is that Paro, which is the opposite of Anava, 42, and Yaakov, they all three of them need all three of those to get to battle Paro. Like I said, it's opposite. The three of these, Anava, 42, and Yaakov together equal Paro. This is So he says it's a known matter, and it's mostly mentioned that a known matter that everything has its opposite, right? Right? It's zelu umadzeh asalokim. So we have one side and the opposite side. So if you look carefully, we can find that almost everything has its opposite in kedusha and an opposite in tumah. So he says this is the same thing here. These three things are what need to be done to battle the Yetzer Hara, which is Paro. These two things, he brought the Torah, right, and we brought the Anava, right. So the Torah we know there's Yaakov Avinu because that's what he was, and in Anava he was a humble person, right. He was also, we also know that he brought the Anava. How do we know the Anava? Yaakov himself reminds us of Anava, because what Yaakov is, it reminds us of the heel, the bottom, someone who comes down, who's low, willing to put himself down in a way that's positive, in a way to recognize that he is nothing in comparison to Hashem and the greatness of Hashem, not to be putting himself down just for nothing, but rather for the sake of Hashem. So he brought down with him to Mitzrayim. He brought down, as I said, the Torah, which was Yaakov Avinu, and his name, which represents the humility, right? So he says that those two things that Yaakov brought were the Torah and the humility. And then, of course, when it says Shemot Yaakov, he's saying is that meaning that he brought with him the 42, the name 42, the 42 name of Hashem came down with Yaakov because he already had two of the three. And so once he had two of those three, Hashem said, okay, I'm bringing this one with us, bring it down with us. He'll be able to, yes, it took some time, and be able to really find it and to really distill it, but it took time. However, those three things, the name of Hashem, 42 letters, we said it, the Membet, which we said comes from being the Siyata Dishmaya, as well as the Anava, the humility, and Yaakov, which is the Torah. Those three things came together, and those things came down to Mitzrayim with Hashem, with Bnei Israel, with Yaakov, and he brought them to. He gave them to Israel, and then through that they'll be able to leave, and right, so they will be able to go, and they will be able to battle the Yetzer Hara that was in Mitzrayim, which we know was very strong. And even though they did sometimes succumb to it, they were able to manage and gather their strength and be able to use it in their favor, and to be able to be redeemed out of Mitzrayim. But if we want to take a lesson out of this entire Torah, which is a little bit on the deeper side, we could say is that basically the three things we need in order to battle our Yetzer Hara are: one is Torah, to learn, continuing to learn and to fine-tune and refine ourselves. Number two is to have humility and be willing to say that I don't know something, be willing to say that I need to learn more, be willing to say that I don't know everything. And the third thing is to continue to ask for mercy of Hashem to be able to help and help conquer and help overcome the Yetzer Hara. Those three things, by using those three things, Torah, humility, and Rachamim, and mercy of Hashem, those three things together will help us battle any of the problems that we may have against the Yetzer Hara, especially as we begin to Shemot is the beginning of the Shovavim period. And we know that one of the things that Shovavim is one of those things is the Yetzer Hara that might entice us in order to battle that, in order to compete that, and in order to gain strength during that time. One of the suggestions is to learn more Torah, and not just learn Torah in terms of quantity, but rather the quality. The quality of Torah should be consistent. It should be always. It should be the retzef. It should be at a time of learning at more focused time and in depth, as opposed to trying to learn 10 times a day, but rather learn one time for really a long time. That depth. Several Svarim mentioned that as a way to, instead of having to do many of the other suggestions for during Shovavim, one of the ways to do it is nowadays is to learn on a consistent basis. Shabbat Shalom.